folks. Welcome to a podcast about Catholic things. This is Eric, the ambassador of common sense, and I'm here with
Dan. I'm the ambassador of nonsense. Hello, everybody. And I'm ready to go. I have my dandrum in hand this time, so I won't be taking a break to go make one.
Are you really trying to pass off a drink named after yourself to make it like popular, or everybody's going to start talking about dandrums?
That's right. One day, okay. I want to go into a bar one day and say, I'd like a dandrum, and they know what I mean.
Okay. Because, like, all three people of the ones who actually hear our podcast are going to...
They're going to know what that is.
Okay. Let's see. This is like the first time in a long time that we have not skipped our recording session.
That's right.
So, and you know what? I forgot to look at current events before we started, so I'm going to have to wing that.
That's okay. You can cut it out.
Yeah. Okay, so today we're going to... I'm not even sure what to call this, but we're going to talk about poverty in general and how Catholics personally are supposed to react to poverty, and then maybe get into more about that in how the community should handle poverty, and finally how the church should handle poverty.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the thing is, the subject itself is not really black and white the way it was a long time ago. Poverty today means something very different from poverty 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's certainly true, and it's kind of I think once upon a time, and like 1,000 years ago, for example, I don't think people worried about poverty. That deserves a little explanation. I don't think people had a concept of poverty as a thing that kind of like we kind of see poverty as a phenomenon. Okay, what are we going to do about poverty? 1,000 years ago, poverty was a state that somebody lived in. That person is living in poverty. But what people worried about was the poor. Okay, one of our Christian duties is to help the poor. And the poor were people. It wasn't some kind of phenomenon that we take on and say, oh, well, in order to achieve...
It isn't something you would cure.
Yeah, exactly.
Something you would help.
It wasn't a disease. It was a condition that people were in, and you help those people.
And there's not, you look through things like the Bible, there's not a lot of talk about ending poverty.
No, there's helping the widows and the orphans and even the aliens and so on and so forth. Individual people who, through whatever circumstances, are unable to care and provide for themselves. We have a responsibility to help them.
But one thing that I think has always been part of this issue is the fact that I think it's always been true that some amount of poverty is self-inflicted.
Yes. Yeah, certainly.
You hear stories about rich merchants who lose everything because of drinking or gambling, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's always been a thing.
Right.
And it's a thing now.
Yeah.
But there's no real talk about that, as if this poor person is different than this poor person. They're still just the poor.
Right. And that's it. In fact, it's kind of interesting that it seems to me that when the Bible talks about the poor, especially the poor that seem to get special attention and favor from God, it seems to more generally identify specific kinds of poor, as I said, like widows and orphans and so forth. Not merely, say, the irresponsible, not your street drunkards and so on and so forth.
Okay, I've heard this argument. I hear this a lot, actually. And in America, you go past intersections and stuff like that. There's always a guy out there with trying to get money, and I think it's fair to say most of these people are heroin addicts.
Yep.
In today's cities, if you see someone on the corner, you're not really. There's nothing wrong with just assuming that this person is a heroin addict. But I say that because assuming that someone is a heroin addict is not necessarily a judgment on them.
Oh, right.
I mean, I've said that to people, and they would say, you have no right to judge them, as if I'm going to let that somehow be a part of my decision whether to give them money or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think if you have the same reaction to someone who is on heroin or isn't on heroin, there's nothing wrong with making that assumption.
Right. It's something that it more leads you to consider, okay, what kinds of things might be beneficial to helping people not get into that situation. I mean, it might lead you to just decide you're going to, I don't know, give aside from helping them, you might give money to, say, addiction recovery programs or something like that if you think that's one of the major causes of...
There is that.
Right, that kind of stuff, yeah.
Hold on a second. My dog has some kind of weird pimple on her lip. And when she comes in from outside, she rubs her lip all over the carpet.
Trying to pop it.
And makes these weird growling noises. It's weird.
She's trying to pop her pimple.
I guess that's what's going on. I guess it itches her. I don't even know what it is. It just looks like a big bump.
You might check it out. Get it checked out in case it's a tumor or something.
Yeah, when I think probably that's going to have to come next paycheck or something.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're poor. So, anyway, you see a person on the side of the road, and then there's the argument that if you give this person money, they're going to spend it on heroin or beer or whatever. They're not going to be responsible with it.
Right.
And I guess one of the first questions is, should that somehow influence your decision to give them or not give them money?
Yeah. I say no.
I say it shouldn't.
And I think you have a take on that, and I have a different take for why.
Okay. My take is that if they spend it on heroin, does it really make any difference? I mean, this person is on the side of the road, and you're giving them money because they're claiming, I mean, if I don't eat, if I don't find a place to warm to sleep, then I'm going to die. But whether it's that, or in some cases, if I don't get a hit of heroin or some other drug, well, first of all, there are certain physical problems that arise from them not getting heroin.
Right.
But aside from that, I think there are people in a state to where not giving if they don't get that heroin that night, I mean, the disparity that they're in could drive them to suicide, things like that. Mm-hmm. And I think you never really know if they can survive a couple more days, maybe some kind of miracle will happen, or they'll, for some reason, change.
Right. That's
at the same time, if you don't give it to them, maybe they'll hit rock bottom, which will force them to change. But if you're talking about charity and the works of charity, I don't think that really is a...
It doesn't work.
I don't think I'm not going to give you money and therefore I'm being charitable. I don't think that's really... That doesn't work.
Yeah, that sounds like some of the... I don't know. That sounds like a Ebenezer Scrooge brand of charity. But, you know, the thing is this. Okay, so let's assume the worst. They're going to take, you know, your $5 or whatever you give them and go out and get a fifth of Mad Dog 2020 or whatever, and that's where it's going, you know, in a bottle. Well, you know, where do we get the charity that we can give to other people? What does charity be? You know, charity is basically love for another person, and it's directed love for that other person. Well, the only reason we can exercise charity towards anyone else is because we have received that love first in Jesus, who died for us. We're talking about an act of charity. And, you know, what is charity? Charity is love for another person. And when we are doing an act of charity, we're just giving charity that we've already received, because the only reason we can love somebody else is because Jesus loved us first. And when he loved us, he did it completely. He died for us. Now, here's the thing that I think people tend to forget who say, well, don't give them money because they're just going to spend it on booze or drugs or whatever. Jesus died for every single one of us, knowing not only that some of us would waste his redemption, but knowing which ones of us would waste his redemption, and he still died for those.
And it is Catholic teaching that Christ died for the sinners as well as the righteous.
Right. Yes. That his death redeemed the sins. His death paid the debt to the Father for the sins of everybody, not just those who would be saved, but even those who end up in hell. Jesus still died for them and paid their debt back to the Father for them. So knowing that, how can you then say, well, my act of charity is only going to go so far as I believe this person is, deserving? I believe this person is going to use my charity the way that I think it ought to be used. How can you do that? I don't think that can be an authentic Christian act of charity to do that. So that's individually how we treat the poor.
It gets a little bit, I mean, okay, so if you say I'm a charitable person, you've got money that comes in every month, and then you take a certain amount of that and somehow channel it to the poor.
Okay.
And
you mean like whether it's giving to your church or to some local charity, something like that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, does that relieve you of obligations when you come face to face with someone who is standing in front of you asking for money? If you deny that person, can you still call yourself a charitable person?
That's a tough one. And I honestly, I kind of feel like no. I mean, I kind of feel like if you're going to be the kind of person who can only be charitable in the abstract, which is kind of what you're doing when you give to a charity, that you're being charitable in the abstract, but I don't think that is the fulfillment of the Christian command of charity.
Right. I
think you have to be charitable in the particular.
Yeah, when you have someone in front of you who is in need, to be able to turn away from that, it kind of says something about your character in general. Yeah. And actually, bringing up Scrooge again, that was one of his claims when in the beginning, when the guy comes up and asks him for money. he said, well, I support these other institutions that help the poor. And even when it's pointed out to him that it doesn't actually help the poor, it just, I guess, keeps them off the streets, that didn't matter. It was, I support these institutions, and that's where my money goes. Therefore, I'm a charitable person.
Right. The workhouses and so forth.
Yeah, the prisons.
I support the prisons and workhouses to get the poor off the street. That's my charity. That's. But even legitimate charity, like Catholic charities and that kind of stuff. Okay, it's good to give to them. It's good to help them, in their missions. But that I don't think that can ever absolve us of the responsibility to be charitable. To the extent that we can when we meet an individual person, especially a person in need.
I'm not a historian. It'd be nice if we could have a historian comment on this, but it seems like there was always part of it seems like there was always some sort of activity on the government's part to help the poor, especially orphans and widows. I don't think it was as I don't think it was always as spelled out as it is nowadays.
Well, I know that.
Well, even in Britain, again, we go back to Scrooge. There were certain things that existed aside from the orphanages, but there were the poorhouses where people who were in debt beyond their scope to get out of debt could go and maybe work off the money that they owed.
Right. And I think you're right, especially, and I mean, I'm trying to think back, to say the time of Christ. Did the in Jerusalem specifically, and the kingdom of Judah, you had King Herod, who was the Jewish king, and maybe I don't know whether he, as a king had, some kind of ministry for orphans and widows or whatever, or that was maybe just intended to be seen to as a local matter. But what I'm trying to think is, was there any, indication that, for example, either Pontius Pilate or the emperor himself, from Rome, did they tend to have programs in place for widows, orphans, that kind of stuff? I don't know. That would be an interesting historical question, but certainly during the rise of the what we would call the Holy Roman Empire, and then throughout the Middle Ages, the governments did have such concerns, but they were very much kind of seen as part and parcel of the church itself, because there wasn't that much of a separation between the government and the church. It's, the king was
right.
The king of the, his kingship was blessed by the church, and then the church's activities were supported by the king, and it was kind of like this symbiosis that existed, and within that context, certainly they did have that. And I know that one of the things that happened in the United Kingdom, Britain and Ireland and Wales and those areas during the Protestant Reformation was that, as part of the attack on the church, what had once been the kind of the responsibility of the various monasteries and religious establishments and so forth to see to this stuff, which certainly the king supported, but the administration of it was pretty much left to the various local popular religious organizations throughout the lands. Well, those were shut down. A lot of the properties were taken away from the Catholic establishments as part of the persecutions of Catholics, taken into the hands of the governments. And one of the excuses given was to bring the care for the poor, to bring the charitable works into part of the government responsibility of the king. And that's kind of when institutional poverty began to be a real problem in the United Kingdom, is when the responsibility for administering that was taken out of the hands of the local church, the local churches, and into the hands of the government.
You know, one of the problems therein is that when you're dealing with governments distributing anything, it has to there has to be a law behind it, and a rule behind it.
Yeah.
And the distribution can only be according to that law. There's no personal judgment that could be a part of this.
Yeah, there's no accommodation of special circumstances or anything.
Right. But when you've got a priest or a nun or even a layperson deciding, we have this much money and we could put it here or put it there, then you've got someone, say, who's in a bad circumstance, just that isn't defined in the law, could get special help. But that stopped existing in our current welfare system. And so you've got people who will misuse it and do misuse it, and then others who, are in desperate need but can't get it.
Yeah. You've got people who have become experts at gaming the system to get by, and they're so good at it that that becomes their full-time job, so to speak, and they do just fine with that. And then the people who really need it, the ones who are, through whatever, collusion of circumstances, find themselves suddenly unable to provide for themselves, and they really need it, and they have no idea how the system works, and they can't get what they need.
Right. And I've heard, I hear it a lot, especially from conservatives. And if most of my friends call me a liberal, because this is a lot of times where I part with them, that the solution here is to cut these people off. And there are millions of Americans right now who are completely dependent on the welfare system. And that the solution is to just stop that. Here, go get a job. That's all you've got. I don't think you can take a person who, the circumstance you just described is someone who normally does work and who does pay their way in life, is suddenly in a position where they can't. And they are kind of at a loss because they don't know how to get the money that they need to go on. And, generally they end up depending on family members and things like that. But I think you could flip that around pretty quickly and say you've got a person who has never worked, doesn't even know how to work.
Oh.
Or go get a job, you cut them off of welfare, and it's
going to be equally lost.
Right, and then you've got a fair percentage who will turn to crime and things like that to make their living.
It kind of reminds me of you've seen the movie that Mom used to like to watch with Elvis Presley, Follow That Dream.
Follow That Dream.
Okay, yeah. So the old man, right? And he's somebody comes along, says something about the government, He says, don't talk to me about the government. I tried to help the government with all their programs. I tried to help them with their welfare. I tried to help them with their relief. So he's getting all this, he's getting enrolled in these programs. It's all he knows how to do. And his mentality is that he's helping the government by doing this stuff.
Right.
Well, I think
it's
that's
comical
actually,
because it's kind of true.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a caricature, but I think it's representative of something that's real there.
And I don't think the writers understood that it was.
Oh, yeah, no, that's true. They didn't know how they were kind of hitting the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, I mean, if you just suddenly cut him off and say, well, in fact, that's one of the things that happened. They cut me off, he says.
Right.
And he doesn't know what to do. Well, that's what a lot of people, they would be in that situation. They don't know what to do.
And we've created this system. Look, we know how this happened. This was about the control of the masses. This is a voter base.
Yeah.
And that created a huge problem here in America. We've got just millions of people who are voting for their own benefits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you could almost
dangerous.
It's a really awkward because in a way, I mean, okay, yeah, to take some of these people and to say, okay, even if you were to say, we're going to train you to be able to do the things you need to do to support yourself. And, the people who are capable, there are some people who just aren't capable. They don't have the mental capacity or whatever. But the ones who, you say, okay, we're going to train you to be able to get along, get by, find a job, keep a job, show up for work every day, and manage your money. Okay, it would be painful for them to go through that process. They would have to work at it. They would have to do things that they've never done before. So even if you saw to it that they were transitioned adequately and given everything they need, they would not want that. They would reject it. And so what we have is this awkward situation where a lot of people in the United States, if you think about it, they're voting, as voters, they're actually voting for their own enslavement in this system.
Yeah, it's a sad situation. I think, it's not like we could come up with a plan and say, this is the solution, this is what we do, and it just go on off without a hitch. And I mean, there's going to be problems no matter what we do. And if we're going to fix a problem, we definitely can't continue to do what we've been doing for the past 10 years. Right. But there are certain solutions that would help it. Number one would be handing some of these things back over to churches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Or at least local communities. Let churches work with local governments to handle some of these things. And of course for churches, that's where you I don't know what it is. I think once upon a time you had a lot more of a Christian ethic in the Catholic Church of finding the way to allow people to take the responsibility for their lives, rather than just handing them a loaf of bread every day because they didn't want to go out and earn it.
Right.
Even today, I almost wonder if a lot of our inner city churches, because you find these, you find a lot of them, saying things that make you wonder, gee, are they just as bad as the socialists in some of their approaches to these? I almost even wonder if it's kind of too late for that to even be a good solution today.
Yeah, I know. Part of the solution, and this is an absolute, because part of the solution has to be that you have an economy that is able to support these people if they were to get off welfare.
Right.
The jobs need to be there.
Yeah. You need a growth
If there are
economy.
no jobs, there's nothing. In our economy, we've proven how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the leftist way of doing it is to continue giving them money, which we know absolutely only kind of fortifies them into that state of poverty.
Right. Right.
If we are going to get people to work, then the jobs have to be there. In order to get the jobs there have to be people who are successful.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals.
Yeah, people who are willing to pay other people to do stuff. And have the money to pay other people to do stuff.
In order to have the money to do that, they have to be rich. In other words, you have to have the rich in order to solve this problem.
Right, right. And
unless everybody's going to work for a government, which
that doesn't work.
History has shown is the bad way to do it. Yeah, it doesn't work.
It eventually collapses because it stagnates and you can't have a growth economy that is mainly government run.
So, you need people who have money, and we've shown that socialism isn't going to work.
Not only do you need people that have money, you need people, you need the people to be able to make money by organizing
by paying
other
someone.
People. And yeah, exactly. Okay,
right.
What's my motive to go pay, these 6 people and those 17 people to do these different jobs and to organize their labor into a successful enterprise that produces something that I can then sell? What's my motivation if I can't profit from doing that? Well, there is no motivation if I can't. I mean, that's it's kind of funny.
The idea that somebody's going to hand out money because they have a lot of it, that's ludicrous.
Right.
And when you hear modern, and I mean modern within the past 5 years, when you hear modern media talk about trickle-down economics, they seem to think that's the way it was supposed to work, or that's the way everyone thought it was going to work.
Yeah.
As if this person has a bunch of money, they're much more likely to pay their employees more.
Yeah.
Or just give it to people or something like that. I don't know why they thought that.
Yeah. No, and that was never the plan. In fact, it's kind of funny. We were having a email discussion with some friends of ours about that very thing, and this person had worked. I don't know where he worked at, but he brought up the case where, because of significant corporate tax cuts, Intel had, with this new environment of lower taxes, opened up a new. I don't know if it was a research plant or a factory or whatever, but they basically opened up a new place somewhere.
And employed people.
That employed people, lots of people. And then he it's kind of funny because he was trying to make the point against so-called trickle down. And so he said they opened up this place, and then when those tax breaks were rescinded later, they ended up having to close the plant. Okay, so wait a minute. Didn't you just exactly prove the point, at least in this one microscopic example? Creating the tax break, lowering the corporate taxes, employed more people and put money into regular people's hands, and increasing the taxes. What did it do? It put people out of work. Increasing the corporate taxes put people out of work. Lowering corporate taxes put people in work, which is exactly the way it was supposed to work.
But since the government's always going to raise taxes again, I guess we should never lower them to begin with. Because then those people who get employed might be unemployed all of a sudden. I don't know.
Maybe that was his point. I don't know.
The funny thing is, I mean, okay, so you've got this rich guy. He makes money on something. He makes more money suddenly because he's got a tax break. And I've heard people say, well, he's just going to put it in the bank. He's not going to spend it.
Well, let's say he does.
Which is,
he could put it under a mattress. Now
the bank has money.
He could put it under a mattress, okay? But you know what? They don't do that. They put it in a bank. At the very worst, they put it in a bank.
Yeah, that is the very worst, and it's not all that bad because now the bank has money, and guess what they do with it?
They're going to loan it.
Yeah.
In fact, they're probably going to loan a significant amount of that money to small businesses.
Yeah.
Some of whom may fail, some of whom may become big businesses.
Right. But all of it is economic activity, and economic activity is what fuels the whole nation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and when you've got like right now is a good time in America because Trump came along. He gave these giant tax breaks more toward the rich than other people. And Reagan, not just the rich, but corporations.
Yeah, yeah.
So these corporations have less tax money on them. Several things happen. First of all, they open more factories or whatever they open them.
Yeah,
and they
hire people. That's the bottom line. They hire people.
People get jobs.
Yeah.
Now, the more people who have jobs, the harder it is for these companies to find people to work for them. Again, This is where the lower class wins here because if they have to fight each other to get employees, that ends up making them pay more. Because if there's only two guys and there's 3 jobs open, the guy who ends up without an employee, he gets more problems. So he's in a position where it's better for him to pay more to get that one employee so that he doesn't go out of business or not have the work done. Right. So that's how trickle down is meant to work. It's not people giving other people money because they have
just because
too much.
They have it. Right. No, exactly. It's because you leverage
and it's
money.
being demonstrated right now with the tax breaks that the Republicans did this past year. It's happening right now as we speak. And I think in a year or two, you'll be able to demonstrate this statistically.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a little early for it now to show, but
I'm sure that there will be people who manage to twist whatever statistics there are, just because anything that
I've heard some people say this is Obama's doing the current economy right now and how well it's doing. That somehow Obama was responsible for all this.
Oh, that kind of just like this is the delayed reaction to all the Obama era, Obama year.
But nobody can point to a single thing that Obama
policies.
has ever actually done that created jobs.
Right, right.
As a community, which means, it's a lot different in other countries. As a community in America, a community is the people who live in a geographic area and the people who live there and the people they elect to run that area.
Yeah, yeah.
So in a community, to deal with the poor, the first, especially when it comes to how the government's going to do this, the first real
moral responsibility.
The responsibility is to make sure that people can work.
Yeah.
In other words, to make sure there are jobs. In other words, to make it easy for businesses to do business in their towns and to prosper.
Right. And I would say
that's the first responsibility.
It's not so much. See, that's where it gets kind of dicey, because I would say they if you say directly they have a responsibility to, and I'm just going to put in air quotes here, make sure that the jobs are there. Well, that kind of almost implies that the government's has a responsibility for creating specific jobs, but that's not really the point.
Okay, yeah.
The point is
right.
that the first responsibility of us communally as a whole group and through our elected leaders is to make sure that the conditions are there to allow job growth, so that as more people are coming into the community, as we grow as a community, so that we can support more people, so that we have the economic growth to be able to take care of each other, including those who, for whatever reasons, mental defect or whatever, can't participate in the normal way.
Right. And most of the time, we can demonstrate by looking at what's gone on in America since the beginning. Generally, the way for the government to do that is to get out of the way, to not put restrictions and to not put taxes on men who do business or businesses who want to conduct business in their communities.
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously, there has to be some restrictions because you have usury and things like that.
Right. There's a of course, the ironic thing is that as we get more and more into what I would say the world of cheap communications, with almost free communications, when you think about the level and type of communication that we can achieve, especially the person to person, the person to many, the many to one, and so on and so forth. These communications, it's becoming increasingly hard, I think, for businesses to make a successful model out of true usury, the kind of usury that enslaves groups of people, because any options that are out there, people can find out about, because communication is so ubiquitous in our society now. Now, it still happens, and we still need guards against it, but I think the rise in communication is shrinking the number of areas and the kinds of specific regulations that the government has to enact.
Yeah, and another part of that is the fact that most of the usury is not from companies, say, squashing other companies by that's the wrong way to start this. Most of it comes from legislation.
Oh, right.
And through when you've got, say, 5 companies who I'm just going to go with the things that I know the most about. You got 5 companies who sell toner cartridges.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of them is in goods with the the legislators in that area, and he gets them to pass a law concerning the disposal of toner cartridges.
Right.
To where it's going to cost money to dispose of toner cartridges. And either he gets a break from that law, or he happens to have enough money in capital to continue, even if he's doing it at a loss, to continue to do business for a while, whereas the other 4 companies don't.
Yeah, yeah.
It was the government that actually destroyed that competition.
Right.
And who put one and gave one power over the rest. And I think a lot of times the problems that happen with people like with companies like Walmart comes from that. It's actually the government. It's crony capitalism, as Trump has said over and over again.
Right.
That's what causes the problem.
Right. It's
not
anti-free market capitalism in a sense.
Right. The company being so big that it can afford to lower its prices, that's not what kills the competition.
Yeah.
Usually it's other things like
it's the regulations that create, barriers to entry to the market and so on and so forth.
Right. When we've talked about socialism a couple times, and okay, here's the thing. When Pope Francis was first elected, I got kind of excited because I had heard he was an advocate for the poor. He was an advocate for the poor, which that's kind of one of my things. Having gone through poverty for a fair amount of time in my life, and having been the recipient of certain charities, things like people bringing food to your door, it's always going to be something that's close to my heart. So when I heard this about Pope Francis, I was pleased about that.
Right.
And then as time went on, I realized that he's not really an advocate for the poor at all. And that's when we started getting into the things like socialism. And the churches, Pope Leo the, what is it?
13th?
13th?
I think
13th
so.
Rejects socialism very clearly. And then we've got Pope Francis coming out with documents like, what was the name of that document?
It was the
Evangelium
Gaudium.
Gaudium?
Evangelii Gaudium.
Evangelizing
the joy of Evangelii is evangelism, but more generally it could be translated as gospel. So it's the joy of the gospel. That would be a good way of understanding what the title means.
Okay, so in the joy of the gospel, he suddenly decided he's going to criticize things like trickle-down economics, which once you read it, it's very obviously he knows nothing about it, because as I mentioned earlier, there's this kind of weird thing lately where they talk about trickle-down as if it's somehow tied to charity.
Right.
Which it isn't. And we've got quotes coming from Pope Francis. He talks about economic growth encouraged by free market, which will succeed in bringing greater justice and inclusiveness, which it does. We know that. And then he gives the opinion that this has never been confirmed by facts.
Although a century of history does confirm it, yeah. I mean, a century and a half of history. I would think so.
If we look at America and compare it to pretty much every other nation, or we can go back even earlier and we could look at Rome, which I don't know what you would call the economy in Rome, but there was something of a free market there. And poor people, even slaves, were getting rich because of the ability to engage in the economy. At least that's
right.
That's what was talked about in a documentary I was watching on the Roman Empire. But you had situations where people who could come from nothing and could make money. So and we know that happens in America all the time. The Starbucks guy, Howard Schultz, who started Starbucks, if I understand right, he started with nothing. He was poor, and he created an empire which employs thousands at least of people. And there's all kinds of economic development because of his company.
Right.
And it's inclusive.
Yeah. And that's the point. I guess that's the point that this idea that somehow this free market economy is not inclusive. The fact that he was able to do that, it's kind of wrong-headed to look at the fact that he's rich and somebody else is poor. The point is that he was poor and he was able to do this. And so could any other poor person under the right circumstances with the right drive and smarts and so on and so forth. I mean, not everybody can be rich. We can't, that would kind of make
I think
that meaningless.
At one time, when you talked about economies, at one point in history, perhaps, your wealth was very, it was determined by what you had, say, in your backyard. If you had coal or oil in your property, then you had wealth.
Right.
And
right. Or if you had a flock of sheep, if you had 300 sheep, that was your wealth.
Now you've got 300 sheep. Yeah. So, but so if someone had a mountain full of coal that they could mine, that meant someone else did not have a mountain full of coal that they could mine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very different nowadays because it kind of doesn't matter what my neighbor has. I can get the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't have to own anything specific in order to do it, in order to enjoy economic success.
Right. Right. And there seems to be a attitude that by creating the opportunities for economic success for everybody, and I'm just kind of reading the Pope's paragraph, especially paragraph 54 in this Evangelii Gaudium. He says, in this context, he's talking about the context of, people, masses of people that don't seem to have any hope or possibilities or whatever, which that ironically it doesn't exist in those countries that in paragraph 54 follow the economic system he's about to criticize. In this context, some people continue to defend trickle-down theories, which assume that economic growth encouraged by a free market will inevitably succeed in bringing about greater justice and inclusiveness. Well, first of all, inclusiveness is one of those strange words. It kind of doesn't mean anything, but it feels good to say it. It reminds me of a quote by Oscar Wilde. He's talking about a sentimentalist. He said, "A sentimentalist is one who desires to have the luxury of an emotion without paying for it." Well, inclusiveness is a sentimentalist kind of word in that sense. It's something that lets people feel good without having to pay the cost of feeling good by actually doing good. But then the Pope goes on to say that this opinion, which I guess he means the opinion that economic growth brings about justice and inclusiveness or something, has never been confirmed by facts. Well, I don't even know how I don't even know what that sentence means, because the thing is, an economic system is just a framework within which people can live out something, and the economic system either allows them to do certain things, or through a legislative approach to the economy, it doesn't allow them. So I don't. It's kind of like a mismatch of things. It's almost like, if he was saying, some people continue to defend the assumption that high-power railway engines will inevitably succeed in bringing about better breakfasts. It's like, well,
Yeah.
Not really. People don't assume that, but if you want to look at the facts of it, the fact that we have railroads is how you get oranges from California or from Florida to the state of Minnesota or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like,
right.
I mean, there's not an assumption that it inevitably, but it's kind of been observed as a mechanism that it sort of kind of makes it work better that way. But then it's kind of interesting. He says, towards the end of the paragraph, well, he says the opinion expresses a crude and naive trust in the goodness of those wielding economic power. Well, again, not really, but it says that
it doesn't at all.
Because
it trusts in the fact that economic power. Well. What is economic power?
It's the power to make economic decisions, which rests in the hands of everybody in a free economy. I mean, that's the beauty of a free economy, is that economic power is distributed, which means that everybody gets to contribute, and those who together collectively, because they belong to a church and because Christianity is maybe free to preach its message in a free, political system, well, then coupled that with a free economy means that we're free to take some of our economic resources and put it towards maybe charitable works or whatever. But then it's kind of interesting. He kind of switches vocabulary in the last sentence, or the second last sentence of the paragraph. He says, "The culture of prosperity deadens us." Well, so far he's been talking about an economy, and suddenly he uses the word culture, as though a free market economy is necessarily paired with or associated with a culture that values economic prosperity above everything else. And I think that's the break. That's the non sequitur in so many people's thinking about economics. They assume that, well, if your economic system isn't somehow set up to force everybody to take these specific government actions towards supporting the poor through this program and this program and this program, if you're not doing that, then what you're doing is encouraging everybody to value their own personal prosperity above everything else. And it just doesn't work. That there's no link between those. Because ultimately the culture is going to come through the human to human interactions, as well as things like the teachings of the church and the work of the church to help people understand how to live, to be more complete human beings according to the vision of God, and so on and so forth. And maybe other organizations, have their things. Maybe the Hindus have their things, whatever. But the point is, it's that kind of stuff. It's those personal interactions that are not economic in nature that drives culture. And then the culture, the more free the economy is, the more free that culture is to manifest itself.
The fact is, when he talks about economic power, the only time economic power is concentrated is when the government takes it away from people via taxes and forced things like forced health care and things like that.
Right.
I mean, if the my economic power is to call this phone company or that phone company to decide who's going to get my business. That's the that's economic power in the United States.
Right.
Economic power doesn't exist in socialist countries.
Right.
I have no economic power.
Yeah, exactly. I can buy my pizza from Domino's or Pizza Hut. I'll buy from Domino's because I like the CEO and his support of the pro-life cause and stuff like that, and his,
Mm-hmm.
but in a fully socialist economy, if you want to take it to its ideal, as an extreme.
The extreme.
Well, you probably don't even have pizza.
Yeah, they can't afford it.
If you can't afford it, and if there's no compelling state interest in people having pizza as a food option, well, then you're not going to have pizza. Now, in reality, there's probably going to always be a certain amount of, in whatever socialist economy, there's going to be a certain amount of, I guess, finer enjoyments, various food cuisines and food preparations, as well as maybe, certain kind of music and performance and stuff like that. Why? Because somebody's going to be in power in a socialist economy, and the people in power are not going to give those things up. And so somebody has to be able to create those. And I guess here's where trickle down, it's almost like trickle down is almost like a natural law here. In that sense, even in a socialist country, those realities are going to trickle down and therefore be somewhat available in the normal baseline society as well. So yeah, you'll go to the market, and even though all the prices are going to be set, and even though it's going to be very controlled, you'll still have the choice whether you're going to go home with beef or fish. All right, fine, whatever. But you really, it's almost like your options are among the various subsistence options, and you don't have any opportunities for the development of what we'd call maybe high culture, art and literature, and the enjoyment of reading or attending plays with your family or whatever.
I don't know how we ended up to this spot in not just our nation, but in the world, where people are still looking at socialism and or communism as the way to end poverty, or even to help poverty, or helped the people who are poor.
Yeah.
It's an odd thing when we've shown in the past 100, 200 years how well our system works, and yet it's still being rejected.
Right.
And not just how well it worked, but how well it liberates certain groups of people who have always been under some kind of oppression.
Yeah.
For example, slaves, or not even just the people who aren't very smart, or women and things like that. Right.
And it's kind of interesting that I had reason to look up a little bit about the history of Chinese immigrants in the kind of especially out west in California stuff, but related to the railroad expansion and that kind of stuff.
Gold guys.
Well, consider the generations of Chinese descendants. We might call them Chinese Americans, but people who from the 19th century, their families were here in the United States, compared with those same, maybe the branches of those same families today living in China. The ones who came to the United States, they came here, okay, they had hardly anything, and they did whatever they could to find work. They became cleaners, they became cooks, they became errand boys. They would take railroad work if it was available. I mean, a lot of them came thinking that they were going to find gold in the hills of California, and it didn't. That didn't quite pan out the way everybody thought it was going to. A lot of the availability of gold was exaggerated. But once they were here, they did what they had to do, and they sought work, and once their work ethic was observed by railroad bosses and so forth, they kind of became the favorites. They were paid reasonably well compared to, say, white guys working for the same railroad companies. Might not be exactly equal, but they were certainly appreciated. And well, today
they weren't scared to load the dynamite. That's the thing.
Well, they weren't scared to load. The thing is, they had a stick-to-itness in their work ethic that even a lot of Americans didn't necessarily have, and so they would work. If they needed to work sun up to sundown in order to get their daily wage, that's what they would do. And they. But the thing is, today, look at the descendants today in America of those Chinese who came to America in the 19th century, and how well they're doing, as a group compared with their families who stayed in China and today are living under the Chinese communist regime. I don't think there's any comparison in the level of opportunity, the level of access they have to the goods of society, and so on and so forth. I think that's the kind of study. If people would just think a little bit about it, there would be no way that they could support something like socialism. But for some reason that it's become a I don't know, that modern America is infatuated with socialism for some reason.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe other parts of the world too. Maybe it's not just an American thing, but it's like it's kind of weird. It's like what other, think of a person who I don't know. Think of a financial prognosticator. Okay, I'm going to tell you what stocks to buy in the stock market and which bonds to buy, and I'm going to make you money by saying which stocks are going to go up and which are going to go down and what you should buy and when and so on and so forth. And he's consistently wrong. I mean, not even hits it like 50-50, like
can't even by accident get it right.
Yeah, he doesn't even do it as well as a random stock purchase generator would do. He's consistently wrong. He consistently loses everything. And yet people keep wanting to believe in him and try it again and again and again. It's for some reason socialism enjoys that kind of a weird aura of nobody wanting to consider the reality of past performance.
Yeah, it's odd, and it's especially attractive to millennials right now. And they're gung-ho for it, and we can point right across the continent to, well, down south of us, where it's gotten so bad that people are starving to death.
Yeah.
But there's an absolute refusal to see it for what it is.
I think, I actually have an explanation for the millennials. I mean, there's a refusal, but for some reason, the last generation of schooling of education in the United States has rejected the idea of critical thinking. They've rejected the idea of applying reason and instead somehow replaced it with this idea of responding to mere feelings of justice, mere feelings of right and wrong, feelings of inclusiveness or exclusivity and, feelings of, it kind of like comes back to the whole word social justice. They talk about social justice. Well, it's the American education system seems to have turned that into like a sentimentalism, a la Oscar Wilde, and replaced any semblance of a thought process with a mere emotional process. Again, but without the cost of a genuine emotion. And so people are just naturally reacting to that, and so they grab onto, for example, socialism, which makes a promise, and they latch onto the promise because, hey, that's a good thing. Well, why wouldn't you be in favor of that?
Right.
And they don't even. It's like it. Not only do they not possess the critical thinking skills to realize why the promise is an empty one, it's almost like they've been trained to not even accept as valid. Yeah, it's like they don't even accept the process of reason as a valid process to consider a course of action.
I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I think a lot of these people are going to grow up.
Well, I hope it happens soon. Yeah, because here's the thing: if they don't grow up, we're going to have a lot more poor to have some kind of responsibility to help, and a lot fewer ways and a lot less resources to help them.
Right. Well, I don't know if we're actually even on topic anymore, but I mean, basically, this is just kind of
there's
a problem of poverty, and what do you do about it? And we've covered personally how a Catholic should react to the poor,
right?
And how, as a society, we should be what possible solutions there are. Now, as the church, again, we've got this weird thing where the Pope is embracing something that's already been rejected.
Right. And nonetheless, I mean, I think it's worth thinking about what should the church really be doing. Well, I mean, obviously on a local level, like you talk about your parish and so on and so forth, we should still be engaged in that attempt to drive a one-on-one engagement of the poor. Okay, there are poor people right here in our community. To the extent that we can find opportunities through our parish to help them, we should be doing so. And especially when it also helps them not just as individuals but as families.
Right.
If it's a father out of work and the church, it goes back to something we were saying before. If our local parish has somebody who, for example, knows the welfare system, and they can help this father who just found himself out of work to figure out how to plug into that while looking for a job to get back on his feet and to be able to provide for his family again. Well, the church is in a unique position to do that in a way that doesn't just enslave the father to the system, but rather, because we're coming from a Christian perspective, continues to exhort him to step up and do what it takes to resume that role of providing for his family, and to offer the right encouragement that, hey, it's tough now, and it may feel humiliating to accept this charity, but right now, if you don't have a job, that humility, that humiliation, that's the responsibility that you have to provide for your family. That's kind of your job right now, because you still got to provide. But don't give up that desire to find that job and to provide for them, without having to draw on that level of charity, and maybe even get yourself to a position where you can then offer that charity to somebody else. But because a government worker's not going to give that perspective to it. So that's something the church can do is to help people to have the experts on the one side, but that personal touch on the other side.
Right. Well, let's see. We don't have a whole lot happening this week in current events.
No.
We do have a couple weird things. So we've got Michael Cohen's testimony. Did you watch him?
No, I didn't. I mean, I saw a lot.
Okay.
I saw all kinds of memes.
I saw clips. Oh, you saw memes.
I saw memes.
I saw a lot of clips.
One of like him saying, "Okay, well then, Trump poured bleach all over me," and and stuff like that. I read the summary, upshot. Okay, he said a few things that were embarrassing, but no smoking gun.
Yeah, he didn't really have anything, and it's like the things that the Democrats had been hoping for were not there at all.
Mm-hmm.
So what he ended up doing was going back to all of the Democrat talking points of racism and misogyny and all that crap.
Oh.
And I mean, that's really all he had to say. And he had no way to demonstrate these things. It was just the accusation itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he couldn't say, Trump hates black people, and this is how I know it.
Instead,
he just said, Trump is a racist. That's all.
Oh.
It was... The whole thing was without substance,
so,
but
So, a case of diarrhea of the mouth.
Yeah,
and
basically.
And maybe constipation of the brain.
Right. And meanwhile, Trump is in Vietnam trying to,
Yeah, that's one of the most shameful aspects of it. Trump, our president's in Vietnam trying to secure security for the whole Korean Peninsula, and we have the Democrats stage this thing with this guy to try to shame the president while he's engaged trying to make some people's lives, we can't imagine what it's like to live in the Korean Peninsula right now, South Korea or North Korea. And the threat of destabilization that exists there right now, and our president's trying to address that and bring some stability to the area, and we're undermining him while he's there, and
some economic reforms to possibly economic reforms to North Korea, and
to a country that's just in abject poverty because of Kim Jong-un's, totalitarian government.
Yeah. And so leading up to this summit or whatever it was, the media kept talking about how Trump, because he's so willing to strike a deal, will agree to just about anything and sell us out.
Mm-hmm.
And what he ends up doing is walking away, not signing anything.
Which was exactly the right thing to do under the circumstances.
Right. But now they're going to criticize that, and I don't know. I'm going to trust Trump on this one.
Yeah, I do too. That whole staging of the Cohen thing during that summit was shameful.
That was sad, yeah. So, we had that going on.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, voters in Cuba approved a new constitution.
Oh, did they?
And it recognizes private and cooperative businesses.
Okay, that's a step.
That is a good step. And it sets term limits for the president there.
So I have not really paid attention to Cuba since Fidel's death and Raul's stepping in. I initially heard that he was, if anything, more of a dictator than Fidel. Is that starting to change or something, or is he showing slightly different colors, or what? Do you know anything about that?
Okay, so I don't know. The new Constitution here's the way this is worded, affirms an irrevocable socialist government.
Okay. So that's the first thing. We're socialist. We're not going to change. The people had to accept that to get a new constitution.
So it doesn't sound like it.
Yeah, doesn't
even
sound
with
like it.
I mean, okay, private businesses, maybe there are things like the hope was in China that with all the trading that we did, and there were certain economic freedoms that were granted to the people, that
China would start to see the
prosperity would urge people away from socialism and communism.
Right.
But it kind of doesn't work, I don't think, without real economic freedom, because you just end up with crony capitalism.
You can't get that without overthrowing the government that's there. And one thing we know about socialist governments is that they don't go away. They don't go away. You have to overthrow them violently. You have to rout them and get them out.
Speaking of communism, Vladimir Putin is warning us he's going to deploy
missiles in Europe. Yeah.
If we deploy missiles in Europe, again, I don't know. This is after 2 years of the media saying that Trump is in Putin's back pocket, and then we get this, and
it doesn't sound like it. The thing is that NATO is still a reality, and as long as it's a reality, and as long as we're part of it, I think we should make a forceful stance that we're going to live up to our responsibilities, and if that means that strategically we think the best way is to, put some missiles in Europe or whatever. We ought to be ready to do that. Now, the way I understand it, we don't have any immediate plans to do that. It's not something that we wanted to do and we're backing down or anything. We just didn't plan to do it. But with Russia coming on with a statement like this, obviously something caused Putin to have a concern. If we're going to say, well, we don't have any plans to do that, we should make it clear that, but it's not because of you. You know what I mean? We should make it should be, well, we don't have any plans to do that yet. But when we, if there's ever a reason, you're not going to stop us.
Yeah. I think we are planning this, though.
Are we?
It is in the plans to put intermediate range missiles
into Europe. Yeah. Now,
considering how much we protect Europe, I think
we ought to have some there.
Do.
Yeah. Or, it's kind of funny. I saw and I don't have the link to it or anything. I should have made a note of it so that we could talk about this. I saw some kind of story about technology, so like fighter jet technology. Hold on just a minute.
Are you talking about those jets that Putin claimed to have that could fly faster than everything we had? And
no.
Because he made up some stuff once that he had this new technology that we wanted, and I'm pretty sure it just ended up him lying, and he didn't have anything like it.
Okay, these are, I think it's the F-35s, but I may be mistaken. But fighter, tactical airplanes that could fly fast enough to intercept and destroy intercontinental ballistic missiles while they're still in the atmospheric, when they launch, they launch, and because they're ballistic, they basically launch and then they're on their path. They're not guided or anything like that. That's what ballistic means. So they launch, and then once they're launched, they follow a path and basically usually over the North somewhere from, say, Russia or wherever they are into some target in the United States or whatever. But these fighter jets are fast enough and equipped in such a way that they would be able to intercept and destroy the ICBMs after they launch, before they make it out of the atmosphere, before they get to the top of their trajectory to start coming back down. So it's basically while they're on their way up. Now,
and we have these.
Well, I saw a article that had some kind of discussion about them. It's I don't know whether it's just a design right now, or whether it's something that we have some prototypes of, or what it is. But here's what interested me about that. The article was fairly, favorable, I think, and I forget what news source I saw it in. But here's the thing. It kind of like, it was touting it as the kind of a thing that could change the dynamic of, the question of nuclear warfare and that kind of stuff, because that's what, the big ICBM stuff is all about, the nuclear warfare. Well, if you can eliminate them as a threat, then you no longer worry about counter-deterrence in quite the same way. There's different kinds of deterrence that you need to start thinking of strategically then. So, but what was interesting is that there was no reference in this article back to Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, which everybody called it Star Wars, because at the time, the what you could call the toys of the Pentagon involved satellites and high energy beams and that kind of stuff, and so everybody thought in those terms. But the actual intention of Strategic Defense Initiative wasn't to have necessarily Star Wars, wasn't to have necessarily space-based. It was just to find some kind of mechanism by which we could neutralize the threat of intercontinental ballistic missiles to the United States. And this kind of a thing is like exactly in that spirit. It's like, wait, why are we only talking about this now? We should have been at this point, if
many moons ago.
Reagan gave us the groundwork and the framework to pursue this. Why didn't we achieve this, back in the 90s? Anyway, that's
Reagan was gone and Trump hadn't come yet. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's odd.
That must be it. But anyway,
and it was laid out as if we did these things, that is somehow a threat to Russia and would provoke them into war. Yeah,
it's like, oh, okay. Well, if we make it so that their nuclear launches against us, which they knew that conventional, it's not like they were going to attack the United States in any kind of conventional way. The big thing about Russia was this: they wanted to be able to expand by militarily conquering countries. Usually what they would do is they would foment some kind of internal socialist revolutionary groups within a country, and then they would send their military aid to those groups to overthrow the government, and now it's a new socialist country which joins the USSR. That was their modus operandi. Well, what they were really worried about was the United States being able to stop them in a country, for basically us to be able to help a government of one of these countries protect itself,
like Vietnam,
from the socialist revolutionaries, exactly like we tried to do in the Far East. And so Russia's thought was, well, hey, we'll have all these nukes, and if the United States tries to interfere, we have this threat that we can send nukes their way. And then the United States has nukes that says, well, if you send nukes our way, we'll send nukes your way. Now we've got this mutually assured destruction, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so then we develop a technology, hypothetically, that neutralizes their nukes, and that's supposed to upset the balance of mutually assured destruction. But the problem is, since the United States was not imperialist anyway, the way the USSR was, that shouldn't have been anybody's, people should have praised that kind of imbalance. And yet, for some reason, people were against it. I don't get it.
Yeah, they still are. And I don't know.
Yeah.
The crazy things people think.
Right.
It's weird.
Well, okay, speaking of crazy things, I have a few from the, I guess, news from the nation of nonsense.
What do you got?
So, okay, everybody knows about rabies, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this woman, she's a wildlife biologist in Florida, had a concern for rabies after she was trying to help a stray kitten that she saw and got bitten. And it was just, she doesn't know about it. And so she went in, and out of a concern for rabies, she received a few shots from the hospital. Nobody told her, anything, but it turned out that the cost of these shots was, particularly the one that, known as rabies immune globulin, was $46,000.
$46,000 for rabies shots?
For a single rabies shot, for 12 milliliters of a particular rabies. Vaccine isn't the right word, but a rabies shot. Yeah. Now, here's the thing: the hospital itself has the average cost of that medicine as only $361 per milliliter, which would have come to about $4,000. But for some reason, they had a certain kind of, I guess the price changes according to various circumstances around the world. Maybe which government is under threat from which other government, where the thing is manufactured.
So did
or something.
She have to pay
I don't know what it is. Well, it turns out her insurance covers most of it. Her husband works for the post office, and they have reasonable insurance, so 90% of it is covered. Plus, the other 10%, in theory, it turns out is, if she can prevail, is going to be covered because, since it was an animal bite, her insurance says that it should have been treated as an accident. An accident injury, which should have been covered 100% after deductible. So she's gonna, resubmit the claim, and hopefully the insurance will pay the rest of it out, and it won't be any big deal. But even the fact that the insurance company has to pay this much money, I think is pretty outrageous.
And I think if I lived there, where was this?
This was in Florida.
Oh, it's in America.
It's in America. This is in America. This is the
I think if my wife got
Kaiser Health Network in Florida,
a rabid cat, I think I would just lock her up for 10 days and see what happens.
Yeah, make sure.
Rather than spend the $46,000
for a shot.
Let's make sure you have rabies first.
She's
lock her up for 10 days and see if she foams at the mouth or something.
She jokes it would have been cheaper just to die because funerals cost less than that.
Yeah. Well, it costs a lot to live in Florida. No, actually, Florida's not that bad.
No. Florida is kind of they have kind of strict rules about taxes and stuff. Like when you move there, you have to immediately tell them. You have 30 days to tell them that you're living there, which is stricter than a lot of other places because they don't want people who to do like their like snowbirding, like people like they'll go to Arizona, have a home in Arizona,
pretend to live there just so they don't have to pay taxes.
Well, or like they'll go and live in Arizona for 3 months and then come back to wherever they really lived, or 3 months of the winter and then come back to wherever they really live. And Florida, it's like, okay, you're here 3 months, but while you're here for those 3 months, you get the benefits of living here, but you're not contributing to our tax system at all. So they require you to actually declare residency if you're there for more than 30 days.
They don't have
to try to discourage
state income tax?
They don't? I didn't know that.
Right.
They have, well, that's pretty cool. They probably have a little bit higher sales tax or something like that. I think Texas is another one without a state income tax. So.
Yeah.
All right. They've got a guy got arrested for wearing, not arrested. Guy got the police called on him for wearing a panda suit.
A panda suit?
One of those full-size panda suits that you can, full-size anything suit. Okay, so they didn't arrest him, but he's in a panda suit. And what was happening, he was supposed to be dog-sitting another person's house. And they were away, and he knew that these guys had a house cam, which they would be checking in and stuff like that. So he thought it would be kind of a funny prank. He'd walk over to their house in this big full panda suit that he has, and to feed the dog and that kind of stuff. And so they go on their camera and they think there's this panda in their house. Well, he didn't even get away from his driveway. He was out the front door locking up his house or whatever he was doing, and some other neighbor saw him, didn't realize he was the guy that lived there, and called the police, said there's this big teddy bear out on my neighbor's front porch.
Somebody's breaking into my neighbor's house.
And so he turns to start walking down his walkway to go to his neighbor's house, and suddenly the police are coming in with their lights and stuff.
Not so fast. What do you think you're doing?
So, anyway. All right, my third and last one, Minnesota. Police get a call. Minnesota's one of those cold states, right? And recently we had a little bit of a cold spell.
Yeah.
Okay, so police get this call of concern. They need to check on the welfare of an adult male that has been reported standing outside with no coat on, hugging a pillow. Now, turns out, you ever seen those that product My Pillow? And the guy's on, and he's, talking about the pillow. This is the only pillow you'll ever need, and it stays, okay. So, turns out there was a cutout of that guy. Those cutouts that life-size cutouts of various things you can get.
Oh. So it wasn't a real guy.
It was a cutout, cardboard cutout of that guy holding his My Pillow.
There's a naked man in the front yard holding a pillow.
Yeah, well, it's not a naked man. He just didn't have a coat on. But okay. Neighbors called. Hey, there's a guy out there. He doesn't have a coat on. You should go check on his welfare. He might be mentally, deficient or something. So the police got called to check on the welfare of this cardboard cutout.
I bet they got joked about a lot. Poor guys who had to go there.
I know. Just the conversations back at the station.
It's not an actual man. Just a cutout, guys. Nothing to see here.
Yeah, move along. All right, set up a perimeter.
I'm going to have to make a big cut. You know what? We have some cutouts of ourselves, don't we, that we could put in our front lawn the next time. And yours is shirtless, ain't it?
No.
You have a shirtless cutout, don't you?
I don't have one. Mine was not shirtless, and I tried to find shirtless, but the only shirtless one had a stupid look on my face.
Okay.
So.
We should tell them what we're talking about. I got big poster printers. I bought some that I was going to fix and resell. And so for Christmas, somebody mentioned doing I should give my wife a life-size nude poster of myself. So all the guys in our family, we took pictures of ourselves, and
not nude.
Not nude. Sometimes shirtless.
Yeah.
I think...
Which is okay.
I was wearing a loincloth, but we made life-size posters and gave them to our wives. So we do have life-size... we could have life-size cutouts of ourselves.
That's
and
right.
we could put it on the front lawn and see if the cops get called. That would be pretty funny.
Have to do it when it's cold. Otherwise, nobody would be concerned for our welfare.
Yeah. Well, no, I would do it when it's cold. I would want everybody to be concerned to see if we could have a contest in which one of us could get the cops there the fastest. Whose welfare people really care about.
You know what? I wouldn't get the cops
Jason
called.
Would win.
I live at...
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
I live in a neighborhood that has a neighborhood association. It's one of those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't say enough bad things about those neighborhoods. But anyway, I wouldn't get the cops called. I would probably get the neighborhood association called on me.
Yeah, you'd get a fine.
Some kind
Jason
of a
would
fine.
have the cops called within 5 minutes. Because all his neighbors are in love with him.
Oh.
I would get eggs thrown at me. Look at that stupid idiot.
Hey, let's go throw some eggs at him. No, wait a minute, though. People would be afraid of yours. Aren't you, like, chasing with a tomahawk or something?
That's right. I have, like, a...
I don't think anybody would mess with you.
I have a... No, let's see. Greg has the machete. I can't remember what I have. I have something. I can't remember what. I probably do have a tomahawk.
All right.
I'll have to look at it again. It was a long time ago. All right. We should wrap up. Okay, thanks for listening to a podcast about Catholic things. Remember to circle the beads. Think about what we said, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
All right, thanks everyone. Bye.